I remember falling. The memory plays like a fever dream, fragments of sensation rather than coherent thought. Not the gentle, but the violent plummet of a meteor. My cradle, a perfect capsule of gleaming adamantium and gold, tore through reality itself. The warp claimed me first, before I had known the touch of my creator, before I had breathed the air of terror, before I had met my brothers. I was meant for something. We all were. 20 suns, crafted with impossible precision, each a flawless vessel for a fragment of his power. But the warp is jealous of perfection. It does not permit such things to exist uncorrupted. I remember voices, countless voices speaking as one. A chorus of impossibilities that resonated through my infant mind as my cradle tumbled through screaming nothingness. The gods watched with interest as my vessel was flung far from its intended path. They spoke of potential, of opportunity, of a weapon that might be turned against its maker. When I emerged from the warp, I crashed upon a world without a name, a place forgotten by cartographers and feared by navigators, a dead world orbiting a dying star where the membrane between reality and nightmare had worn perilously thin. I should have perished there. A child alone, even one such as I, could not survive such a place. But I was found, not by him, not by my father, but by those who had always watched from beyond the veil. They sent their servants to retrieve me from the wreckage of my cradle, to nurture me, to guide me, to reshape me. My earliest memories are of hunger, not the simple hunger of an empty stomach, but a deeper, more primal hunger, a need to consume, to grow, to become. The servants fed me strange meats and stranger liquids that burned like fire and froze like ice. They whispered secrets into my ears as I slept. Secrets of power and betrayal, of gods and monsters, of the great game played across eternity. I grew quickly, as all my brothers did. Within a year, I had the body of a young man. Within 2, I towered over my caretakers. My mind expanded just as rapidly, absorbing knowledge with an insatiable thirst. But unlike my brothers, who were taught of duty and honor, of empire and conquest, I was taught of chaos and change, of excess and decay, of blood and skulls. The servants called me Malchior. Whether this was the name my father intended for me, I do not know. Perhaps it was a cruel joke, a mockery of the name I might have borne. Perhaps it was a name whispered by the gods themselves. It matters little now. Names are transient things, as meaningless as the lives of mortals. My childhood, if it can be called such, was a series of trials, tests of strength, of will, of cunning. The servants would release beasts into my chambers, twisted things of claw and fang that had once been men. I was given no weapons, no armor, only my wits and my hands. The first time, I nearly died. The beast tore great chunks from my flesh before I managed to break its neck. I lay in a pool of my own blood, feeling my enhanced body struggling to knit itself back together. The servants watched impassively. They did not intervene. They did not offer aid. They simply observed, noting my strengths and weaknesses with cold, calculating eyes. When I had healed, they sent another beast, and another, and another. I learned quickly. I had to. Each beast was stronger, faster, more cunning than the last. Each victory left me scarred, but stronger. My body adapted, my reflexes sharpened, my mind hardened. I began to anticipate the attacks, to prepare traps, to fashion crude weapons from the bones of previous foes. The servants nodded in approval. They spoke among themselves in hushed tones, discussing my progress, my potential. They seemed pleased, though their faces, hidden behind elaborate masks of bone and metal, revealed nothing. One night, as I slept fitfully on a bed of rags stained with the blood of 100 beasts, I dreamed of my brothers. I saw them clearly, though I had never met them. 20 perfect beings, each unique, yet each unmistakably of the same blood as I. I saw them growing, learning, fighting. I saw them at our Father's side, basking in His golden light, His love, His approval. I saw what might have been, what should have been. I woke with tears on my face and rage in my heart. For the first time, I understood what had been taken from me, what had been stolen. I howled my grief and anger, a sound that shook the very foundations of my prison. The servants came running, alarmed by my outburst. I killed 3 of them before the others subdued me with sorcery and poison. When I regained consciousness, I was no longer in my chamber. I had been moved to a vast cathedral, a place of shadows and whispers, of blood-stained altars and writhing statues. The air was thick with incense and the copper tang of fresh blood. Symbols were carved into every surface, pulsing with malevolent energy. It was there that I first saw them, not in dreams or visions, but in the flesh. The 4 powers that rule the warp, the gods that my father denied, yet could not destroy. They appeared to me not in their true forms, which would have shattered my mind despite my transhuman nature, but as shadows, reflections, echoes of their immensity. One was a towering figure of brass and blood, his armor adorned with skulls, his hands ending in wicked claws. His voice was the roar of battle, the scream of the dying, the clash of blade against blade. Another shifted constantly, a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes that hurt the eyes to behold. His laughter was the sound of plans within plans, of schemes unfolding across millennia, of fate being rewritten. The third was a vision of perfection, beauty so absolute it brought tears to my eyes. Every movement was a dance, every word a song. The promise of pleasure beyond imagining hung in the air around him like a heady perfume. The last was a bloated, festering thing, his flesh a canvas of disease and decay. His voice was the soft, wet sound of maggots feasting on corpse flesh, of pustules bursting, of bodily humors leaking from open wounds. They spoke to me, each in turn, offering power, knowledge, pleasure, resilience. They showed me visions of what I could become under their guidance. A warlord without equal, leading vast armies across the stars. A sorcerer of unimaginable power, reshaping reality to my whim. A being of perfect sensation, experiencing pleasures no mortal could comprehend. A deathless entity, immune to time and decay, spreading my gifts to countless worlds. All they asked in return was my loyalty, my worship, my soul. I hesitated. Some fragment of my father's design, some echo of his purpose for me, caused me to pause. The gods sensed my reluctance. They changed their approach. They showed me my brothers again, now fully grown, leading their legions in the Great Crusade. I saw them conquering worlds in our Father's name, standing at his right hand, honored and beloved. Then they showed me what awaited me if I refused their offer. An eternity of torment, of being torn apart and remade, only to be torn apart again, of serving as a plaything for demons, of watching helplessly as my brothers claimed the glory that should have been partly mine. What choice did I have? Abandoned by my father, lost to my brothers, alone on a world of nightmares, I knelt before the 4 powers. I pledged myself to their service. I accepted their gifts, their marks, their blessings. The pain was beyond description. My perfect form, crafted by the finest geneticists of terror, infused with fragments of my father's own divine essence, was remade according to the whims of the Chaos Gods. My bones broke and reformed, my muscles tore and regrew, my organs shifted and changed function, my skin split and healed with new textures, new colors, new sensitivities. When it was done, I was no longer recognizable as one of the Emperor's sons. I had become something else. Something new. Something terrible. The servants, who I now recognized as cultists, dedicated to the ruinous powers, bowed before me. They brought me armor forged in hellish furnaces, crafted from materials not found in the material realm. They brought me weapons that sang with the voices of demons, thirsting for souls, hungry for blood. I was no longer Malchior, the forgotten son. I was Malchior, the Chaos Primarch, the 5th god, the weapon that would bring the Emperor to his knees. That was the beginning of my true existence, the end of what might have been, and the start of what was, the birth of a monster. I tell you this not to gain your sympathy or your understanding. Such concepts are meaningless to me now. I tell you this so that you might comprehend the magnitude of what followed, so that you might grasp, in your limited way, the scope of the tragedy that unfolded. For I was not the only one to fall. I was merely the first, the harbinger of a greater betrayal to come. Listen well, for this is a tale few have heard, and fewer still have survived to repeat. This is the chronicle of the unremembered Primarch. This is my story. The first world I conquered in the name of chaos was the very world upon which I had been raised. The cultists had called it Galmech, though I doubt that was its original name. It was a bleak place of jagged mountains and toxic seas, of perpetual twilight and whispering winds. The only inhabitants were the cultists themselves, and the beasts they had created through dark rituals and forbidden sciences. I slaughtered them all. Not out of mercy or revenge, but as an offering to my new masters. The four gods had demanded blood, and I gave it to them gladly. I stalked through the twisted corridors of the cathedral complex, my new armor drinking in the souls of those I killed, my weapons keening with pleasure as they tasted flesh. The cultists did not resist. They welcomed their deaths, seeing it as an honor to be sacrificed by the welcomes of the strapped being they had helped create. They died with prayers on their lips, thanking the gods for the privilege of serving as my first victims. When the last of them had fallen, I stood amidst the carnage, breathing heavily, my armor slick with gore. I felt no remorse, no guilt, only a sense of rightness, of purpose fulfilled. I had made my first offering to the gods, and they were pleased. From the bodies of the slain rose tendrils of multicolored smoke, coalescing into a swirling portal. A gateway to the warp, an invitation. I stepped through without hesitation. The realm that awaited me defied description. It was a place of impossible geometries, of contradictory physics, of sensations that had no names in any human language. It was the realm of chaos, the domain of the gods, the sea of souls. Here, reality was malleable, shaped by will and emotion rather than natural law. Here, time flowed differently, sometimes backwards, sometimes sideways, sometimes not at all. Here, I could feel the presence of the gods more strongly, their vast consciousnesses pressing against the boundaries of my mind. I wandered for what seemed like an eternity, though it may have been mere moments. I encountered beings of pure energy, demons of all shapes and sizes, lost souls still clinging to the remnants of their humanity. Some fled from me, others prostrated themselves before me. Still others sought to challenge me, to test the mettle of this new champion of chaos. None survived the encounter. Eventually, I found myself in a place that seemed more stable, more defined than the churning madness around it. A vast plain of black glass, stretching as far as the eye could see in all directions. The sky above was a maelstrom of colors, a cosmic ballet of energy and emotion. In the center of the plain stood a fortress, not the crude fortifications of mortal design, but a true fortress of the warp. Its walls were made of screaming faces, its towers of twisted bone, its gates of living metal that pulsed like a heart. It was a physical impossibility, an architectural nightmare, a palace of pure chaos. It was to be my domain, my kingdom, my prison. Within its walls, I found an army waiting for me. Not mortal soldiers, but daemons of all four powers, bound to my service by the will of their masters. They were mine to command, mine to lead in battle, mine to sacrifice as I saw fit. The gods had granted me a legion of my own, a mockery of the space marine legions that my brothers commanded. But whereas their legions were composed of mortal men enhanced through science and training, mine was a host of immortal entities, creatures of pure warp energy given form and purpose. I named them the Forgotten Sons, for they, like me, had been cast aside, denied their rightful place in the universe. They bore no heraldry, no colors, no battle cry. They were silent, faceless, nameless. They existed only to serve, to kill, to die, and to be reborn. With my legion at my command, I turned my attention to the material realm. The gods had given me a purpose, a mission, a reason for my continued existence. I was to be their general in the war against reality itself. I was to lead their forces in a campaign of conquest and corruption that would ultimately bring the entire galaxy under their dominion. But first, I needed information. I needed to understand the state of the galaxy, the progress of my father's great crusade, the disposition of my brothers and their legions. I needed to know where to strike, where to sow the seeds of corruption, where to begin the long process of undermining the Emperor's work. The gods, in their infinite wisdom or their cruel humor, provided me with a guide, a former remembrancer, one of the artists and historians who had accompanied the expeditionary fleets of the Great Crusade. She had been captured during a raid, her ship dragged into the warp by a freak warp storm. She alone had survived the journey, though her mind had been shattered by experience. The gods had reassembled her consciousness, piece by piece, remaking her as a repository of knowledge, a living archive of the Imperium's history. They had also granted her a form of immortality, ensuring that she would serve as my chronicler for all eternity, recording my deeds for an audience that would never exist. Her name was Lyra, though that may not have been what she called herself in her former life. She was a small, frail thing, her body emaciated, her skin pale as parchment, her eyes milky white and blind. But her mind, her memory, was perfect. She could recall every detail of every event she had witnessed or heard described. She knew the names, strengths, and locations of all 18 of my brothers and their legions. She knew the structure of the Imperium, the names of its leaders, the extent of its territories. She knew the Emperor's plans, as far as they had been revealed to mortal men. She feared me, as was right and proper. But she also pitied me, which I found both amusing and infuriating. She saw me not as a god or a monster, but as a victim, a broken thing to be mourned rather than worshipped or feared. I allowed her this delusion. It made her more compliant, more willing to share her knowledge. And knowledge, in the war I was about to wage, was as valuable as any weapon. From Lyra, I learned of my brothers' victories and defeats, their triumphs and setbacks. I learned of the worlds they had conquered, the peoples they had subjugated, the empires they had toppled. I learned of their personalities, their quirks, their strengths and weaknesses. I learned of Horus, the first found, the favored son, the perfect warrior and statesman. I learned of Sanguinius, the angel, beloved by all, cursed with a thirst for blood. I learned of Rogel Dawn, the Praetorian, stoic and unyielding. I learned of Angron, the Red Angel, consumed by rage, implanted with the butcher's nails against his will. I learned of them all, these brothers I had never met, these siblings who did not know I existed. I studied them, analyzed them, came to understand them as well as anyone could from second-hand accounts, and I hated them. I hated them with a passion that surprised even me. I hated them for their accomplishments, for their acclaim, for their place at our father's side. I hated them for having what had been denied to me. I hated them for not knowing me, for not missing me, for not even realizing that a 20th brother had been lost. Most of all, I hated them for their freedom. For while they may have been bound by duty, by honor, by loyalty to the Emperor and his vision, they still had choices. They could still shape their own destinies, forge their own paths. They were not playthings of gods, not pawns in a game beyond their comprehension. They were not what I had become. With Lyra's knowledge to guide me, and my Daemon Legion at my command, I began my campaign against the Imperium of Man. Not a direct assault, not yet. I was powerful, but not powerful enough to challenge the combined might of the Space Marine legions. Instead, I worked from the shadows, undermining, corrupting, planting the seeds of doubt and dissent. I appeared in the dreams of imperial governors, whispering promises of power and immortality. I sent my daemons to possess the weak-willed and the desperate. I arranged for forbidden texts to be discovered by those with the means and the curiosity to translate them. I orchestrated warp storms that delayed or destroyed imperial fleets, isolating worlds at crucial moments. Small actions, subtle manipulations, a web of influence spreading slowly but inexorably across the galaxy. The gods watched with approval as their champion carried out their will. They granted me further blessings, further mutations, further power. With each success, I became less human, less recognizable as one of the Emperor's sons, and more a creature of the warp. My armor, once a mockery of the power armor worn by space marines, became a part of my flesh, fusing with my skin until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. My weapons changed with my moods, sometimes appearing as traditional blades or firearms, sometimes as living appendages that screamed and wept as they killed. My face, once bearing some resemblance to my creator and my brothers, became a shifting mask of horror, reflecting the emotions of those who beheld it. To some, I appeared as a rotting corpse. To others, a creature of impossible beauty. To still others, a mechanical monstrosity or a being of pure energy. Few could look upon me without going mad, their minds unable to process the contradictions of my existence. Yet, through all these changes, all these transformations, I retained my intellect, my cunning, my strategic genius, the gifts of a Primarch, perverted but not diminished by chaos. I used these gifts to further the gods' agenda, to spread their influence, to prepare the galaxy for the coming storm. And all the while, I watched my brothers. Through warp scrying and the reports of my agents, I observed their campaigns, their triumphs, their rare defeats. I studied their tactics, their personalities, their relationships with each other and with our Father. I saw the seeds of discord being sown among them, the rivalries, the jealousies, the philosophical differences. I saw Perturabo's resentment of Rogel Dawn. I saw Mortarian's distrust of Psykers, including our Father. I saw Lorgar's desperate need for something to worship and the Emperor's harsh rejection of his devotion. I saw the potential for a greater betrayal than my own, a schism that would tear the Imperium apart, a civil war that would leave humanity vulnerable to the predations of chaos. And I laughed. The stage was set for the greatest tragedy the galaxy had ever known. The Horus heresy was inevitable. All that remained was for the right actor to step onto the stage to speak the first lines of this cosmic drama. That actor was not to be me. I was too corrupted, too obviously a creature of chaos to serve as the gods' primary agent in this endeavor. No, they had a more subtle plan in mind. They would use one of my loyal brothers, the most respected, the most trusted, the most beloved. They would use Horus. When the corruption of the War Master began, I watched with interest from my fortress in the warp. I observed as he was wounded on the moon of Davin, as the lodge members brought him to the temple of the Serpent Lodge, as the rituals were performed to save his life and damn his soul. I could have intervened. I could have appeared to him, revealed myself as his lost brother, warned him of the gods' true intentions. I could have shown him what he would become, what awaited him if he continued down this path. I did not. Partly because the gods would not have allowed it, partly because I had long since lost any sense of brotherhood or loyalty to my siblings, and partly because I wanted to see him fall. I wanted to see the favored son brought low, humbled, corrupted as I had been corrupted. So I watched, and I waited, and I prepared. For while Horus would be the face of the rebellion, the figurehead around whom the traitor legions would rally, I would play my own part in the coming conflict. I would be the shadow behind the shadow, the whisper behind the whisper, the hand that guides unseen. The gods had their plans for Horus and the other Primarchs who would join his cause. They had their plans for the wider conflict, for the assault on Terra, for the confrontation between father and son that would shape the destiny of humanity for millennia to come. But they also had plans for me. Plans that would see me face my loyal brothers in battle, test my corrupted might against their righteous strength. Plans that would bring me, at long last, into the light of Imperial history, even if that history would later be expunged, forgotten, denied. For I am the unremembered Primarch, the one who fell first, who fell furthest, the one whose very existence became a secret, a myth, a whispered warning in the dark corners of the Imperium. This is my tale. A tale of betrayal, of corruption, of hatred and envy and endless war. A tale that begins with a child lost in the warp and ends, if it ends at all, in a universe drowning in blood and madness. Listen well, for such knowledge is dangerous. Listen well, for such tales are rarely told. Listen well, for I am Malchior, the forgotten son, the lost Primarch, the champion of chaos undivided. And my story has only just begun. The Siege of Terra was chaos incarnate. 9 Space Marine legions, led by the corrupted War Master Horus, descended upon humanity's birthworld in a storm of fire and death. The sky burned with the contrails of drop pods and assault craft. The void above was choked with warships exchanging devastating broadsides. The walls of the Imperial Palace, that greatest of fortresses, shuddered under impacts that would have leveled continents. I was not there, not physically. The gods had other plans for me during that pivotal battle. While Horus led the direct assault on Terra, I was tasked with a different mission, one that would have far-reaching consequences for the Imperium in the dark days to come. The gods sent me to Titan, largest moon of Saturn, home of the Grey Knights, or rather, home of what would become the Grey Knights. For at that time, the Fortress Monastery did not yet exist, and the special-purpose Space Marine chapter was still merely a contingency in Malcador the Sigillite's mind, a final desperate measure should the unthinkable happen and the Emperor fall. Malcador, ever the pragmatist, had begun gathering psychers of unusual power and purity. Space Marines from various legions who had demonstrated both psychic potential and incorruptible loyalty. They were being held in secret facilities on Titan, undergoing tests and modifications that would eventually transform them into the Emperor's ultimate weapon against chaos. My mission was simple: find these proto-Grey Knights, kill them, prevent the chapter from ever being founded. I took with me a warband of my forgotten sons, daemons bound to mortal form through dark rituals. We traveled not by ship, for no vessel could have approached Terra undetected during the siege, but through the warp itself. We tore a hole in reality at the edge of the Sol system and emerged directly on Titan's surface, bypassing the orbital defenses that Malcador had established. The moon was a desolate place, its surface scarred by craters and canyons. The atmosphere was thin, barely breathable, even for genetically enhanced beings like Space Marines. The gravity was light, making movement strange and unpredictable for those accustomed to terrestrial conditions. We materialized near one of the secret facilities, a nondescript bunker built into the side of a mountain. There were defenses, of course, automated turrets, minefields, psychic wards. My daemons triggered them all, sacrificing themselves to clear a path for me. I cared nothing for their destruction. They were tools, nothing more, and could be replaced once I returned to the warp. The outer defenses breached, I approached the bunker alone. The door was massive, a slab of adamantium meters thick, designed to withstand orbital bombardment. I placed my hand upon it, feeling the psychic wards burning my corrupted flesh. With a thought, I unraveled them, the counter-sorcery flowing from my fingers like black lightning. The door opened, not from my efforts, but from within. They knew I was coming. They were ready for me. 8 Space Marines stood in the entrance, their armor a dull gray without chapter markings or insignia. Each held a force weapon, crackling with psychic energy. Their eyes glowed with inner power. These were not ordinary Astartes. These were the precursors to the Grey Knights, psychers of tremendous ability, warriors trained to fight the demonic. I smiled, though my face was hidden behind a helm of twisted metal and bone. This would be a worthy battle. "Brothers," I said, my voice a chorus of whispers, "I have come to offer you a choice. Join me, embrace the gifts of the warp, or die where you stand." Their response was predictable. Bolt pistols raised, force weapons ignited to full power, battle cries on their lips. They charged as one, a coordinated assault that would have overwhelmed a lesser foe. But I was no lesser foe. I was a Primarch, a being crafted by the Emperor himself, enhanced further by the blessings of 4 Chaos gods. I was power incarnate, a nexus of warp energy bound in corrupted flesh and twisted metal. The battle was brutal but brief. Their force weapons bit deep into my armor, drawing blood that hissed and steamed upon contact with Titan's thin air. Their psychic attacks battered at my mental defenses, seeking weaknesses, vulnerabilities. Their bolter shells exploded against my chest and limbs, blasting away chunks of ceramite and flesh that regrew almost instantly. I gave as good as I got. My own weapons, a pair of falchions that phased in and out of reality, cut through their armor as if it were parchment. My psychic powers, a chaotic blend of all 4 chaos disciplines, overwhelmed their defenses one by one. My physical strength, the inherent might of a Primarch multiplied by daemonic blessings, crushed ceramite and bone with equal ease. One by one, they fell. Skilled as they were, determined as they were, pure as they were no match for me. As the last of them died, his twin hearts pierced by my blade, I felt a surge of something like disappointment. I had expected more from these chosen warriors, these proto-grey knights. Then I felt it. A psychic presence of immense power, approaching rapidly. A mind I recognized from Lyra's descriptions, from the whispers of the gods, from the legends that even then were spreading throughout the galaxy. Malcador the Sigillite, right hand of the Emperor, regent of terror, keeper of secrets, master of spies. The second most powerful psyker in the Imperium, perhaps in all humanity. He materialized before me, not physically, but as a psychic projection. His form was translucent, ghostly, but his eyes burned with very real power and determination. He wore simple robes, carried his staff of office, and regarded me with a mixture of sorrow and disgust. "So," he said, his voice echoing oddly through both physical space and the warp, "you are the one they call Malchior, the lost son, the forgotten brother." I inclined my head in mocking respect. "Malcador the hero, I had not expected to meet you here. Shouldn't you be on Terra, helping my father prepare for Horus's arrival?" "Your father," Malcador said, emphasizing the word, "knows what is happening here. He sent me to deal with you while he focuses on the greater threat." I laughed, the sound distorted by my helm's vox emitters. "The greater threat? Is that what I am to him? A lesser concern? An afterthought? How typical." "You were never an afterthought, Malchior. You were mourned, searched for. Your father never abandoned his hope of finding you." "Lies," I snarled, my amusement turning to rage in an instant. "If he had truly searched, he would have found me. If he had truly cared, he would have saved me from the gods. He left me to my fate, just as he will leave Horus to his. Just as he left Angron on Nuceria, bleeding and dying while his gladiator brothers were slaughtered. Just as he will leave all his sons when they no longer serve his purpose." Malcador shook his head, his expression one of genuine pity. "You don't understand. You never did. The Emperor's vision extends beyond individuals, beyond families, beyond legions. He sees the entirety of humanity's potential, the full span of its possible futures. Every decision he makes, every sacrifice he accepts, is in service to that vision. A vision that demands blind obedience," I countered. "A vision that treats sentient beings as tools, as means to an end. A vision that would see the galaxy scoured of all diversity, all possibility, all freedom, in the name of a sterile, soulless utopia. Better that than the hell your masters would create," Malcador said, his voice hardening. "I have seen the realms of chaos, Malchior. I have gazed into the warp and comprehended its true nature. There is no freedom there, only slavery of the most absolute kind. No diversity, only corruption. No possibility, only endless, meaningless change that leads nowhere and accomplishes nothing." I raised my falchions, their edges keen enough to cut reality itself. "Philosophical debates bore me, old man. I came here to kill, not to talk. These 8 were just the beginning. I will hunt down every one of your chosen psychers, every proto-grey knight, every seed of the chapter you hope to plant. I will ensure that your final contingency never comes to pass." Malcador's projection smiled sadly. You're too late. These 8 were a distraction, nothing more. A sacrifice I regret, but one they accepted willingly. The true Grey Knights, the 8 brothers who will form the core of the chapter, are already elsewhere, already hidden so well that neither you nor your gods will ever find them until it is far too late. Rage flooded through me, a tide of burning hatred that threatened to overwhelm my reason. I lunged at Malcador's projection, my blades passing harmlessly through his insubstantial form. "Where?" I demanded. "Where have you hidden them?" "Beyond your reach," Malcador said simply. "Beyond anyone's reach, for now. When they return, they will be the Emperor's vengeance incarnate. They will be anathema to your kind, bringers of death to daemons, cleaners of corrupted worlds. They will be everything you could have been, Malchior, had you found your way to Terra instead of falling into the clutches of the ruinous powers." I howled in frustration, unleashing a blast of warp energy that would have reduced a mortal man to atoms. It passed through Malcador's projection without effect. He regarded me calmly, unmoved by my display of impotent rage. "Your mission has failed," he said. "Return to your masters. Tell them that their scheme has come to nothing. The Grey Knights will exist. They will hunt your kind across the millennia. They will be the Emperor's final sanction against chaos, his silver bullet aimed at the heart of the great enemy." "This isn't over," I snarled. "Terra will fall. Horus will triumph. The Emperor will die, and his Imperium will crumble to dust." Malcador's smile became grim. "Perhaps, perhaps not. But know this, lost son. Even if Terra falls, even if the Emperor falls, humanity will endure. The species you once belonged to will survive, will adapt, will continue its long march toward evolution and ascension. With or without the Emperor to guide it, humanity has a destiny that your masters cannot prevent." With those words, his projection faded, leaving me alone amidst the bodies of the 8 slain space marines. I stood in silence for a long moment, my rage cooling to a smoldering ember. I had failed. For the first time since my corruption, I had failed utterly and completely. The gods would not be pleased. I returned to the warp, traversing the immaterium with the ease of long practice. I materialized within my fortress, my domain in the realms of chaos. As expected, the gods were waiting for me, their presences filling the throne room with contradictory sensations and impossible geometries. They did not speak, not with words. They communicated in emotions, in visions, in sensations of displeasure and disappointment that threatened to tear my mind asunder. I knelt before them, accepting their censure, their punishment. The punishment was severe. They unmade me, piece by piece, molecule by molecule, only to rebuild me in new and more terrible forms. They tore my consciousness into fragments and scattered them across the warp, forcing me to experience 1,000 different hells simultaneously. They showed me visions of futures that would never be, of glories that would never be mine, of a brotherhood I would never know. When it was done, when they had extracted their pound of flesh and more, they cast me out of my own fortress, banishing me to the furthest reaches of the warp. I drifted there, a being of pure consciousness without physical form, for what seemed like eternity. Time has little meaning in the warp. What felt like millennia to me may have been mere days in the material realm. Or perhaps it was the opposite. Perhaps centuries passed while I floated in that non-space, that absence of reality. When I was finally permitted to reconstitute my physical form, to return to my fortress, I found the galaxy much changed. The Horus heresy had come and gone. Terra had not fallen, but neither had it emerged unscathed. The Emperor sat upon the golden throne, neither alive nor truly dead, a withered husk sustaining itself and the Astronomicon through the daily sacrifice of thousands of psychers. Horus was dead, slain by our father in a duel that had left both mortally wounded. The traitor legions had fled to the Eye of Terror, a massive warp rift where reality and the immaterium bled into one another. The loyal legions had been broken up into smaller chapters as part of the reforms known as the Codex Astartes. Their power diminished, their autonomy curtailed. The Imperium had survived, But it was a changed entity. No longer the secular empire of progress and enlightenment that the emperor had envisioned. It had become a stagnant theocracy, worshipping him as a god despite his explicit wishes to the contrary. Technology was no longer understood but merely maintained, innovation was heresy, and countless worlds labored in ignorance and squalor to support a bloated, inefficient bureaucracy. In short, it was the worst of all possible outcomes. The Emperor's dream was dead, yet chaos had not triumphed, either. Instead, the galaxy was locked in a state of perpetual conflict, a grim darkness where there was only war, where hope was the first step on the road to disappointment, where the laughter of thirsting gods echoed beneath the surface of reality. The gods were not displeased with this state of affairs. Conflict fed them, warfare nourished them. The emotions generated by endless war, by hopeless struggle, by despair and rage and determination in the face of inevitable defeat, all these things strengthened the ruinous powers. They had new champions now, new favored servants. The Primarchs, who had turned to chaos during the heresy, Horus accepted, still lived, though many had ascended to daemonhood and rarely involved themselves directly in material affairs. Their legions continued to fight in their names, spreading corruption and destruction wherever they went. And so I found myself in a strange position. No longer the sole Chaos Primarch, no longer unique in my fall from grace. I was one among many now, a brother to the damned, a peer to the corrupted. The gods still had use for me, still valued my service, but I was no longer their only or even their primary instrument in the material realm. This change in status granted me a certain freedom. The gods' attention was divided among many servants, their demands spread across many shoulders. I was expected to continue my service, to further their goals, to spread their influence, but the means and methods were largely left to my discretion. I spent the next several millennia wandering the galaxy, sometimes in the warp, sometimes in reality. I led raids against imperial worlds, corrupted planetary governors and space marine chapters, unleashed plagues and demonic incursions, all the usual activities of a servant of chaos. But increasingly, I found myself drawn to quieter pursuits. I collected knowledge, particularly knowledge of the Primarchs, both loyal and traitor. I studied their histories, their personalities, their fates. I gathered artifacts associated with them, from weapons and armor to personal items and artistic creations. This obsession puzzled my demon servants. They could not understand why their master, a being of such power and potential, would waste time on such trivial matters. They did not understand the hole within me, the emptiness that all my power, all my corruption, all my service to chaos could not fill. I had never known my brothers. I had never stood shoulder to shoulder with them in battle, never shared their triumphs or sorrows, never experienced the camaraderie that bound them together even as ideological differences drove them apart. I had been denied the very thing that defined them, that shaped their existence, that gave meaning to their lives. So I collected fragments of them, echoes, shadows, trying to piece together what I had lost, what had been stolen from me by the vagaries of fate and the machinations of the warp. It was during one such collecting expedition, approximately 38,000 years after the Horus heresy, that I encountered something unexpected. I had come to a backwater world in the Ultima Segmentum, drawn by rumors of a relic that had supposedly belonged to Corvus Corax, the Primarch of the Raven Guard. The relic was said to be a feather from his jump pack, preserved in a stasis field by an ancient cult that worshipped the Primarchs as divine beings separate from the Emperor. I arrived to find the planet in turmoil. A warband of world-eaters, followers of Khorne and my corrupted brother Angron, had also heard the rumors and arrived before me. They cared nothing for the relic itself, only for the skulls they could claim in their god's name. They had already butchered half the population and were working their way through the rest with methodical savagery. I was annoyed. The cult and its members would likely be destroyed before I could extract the information I needed about the relic's location. I confronted the leader of the warband, a Chaos Lord named Krazak, and demanded that he withdraw his forces. He laughed in my face. He did not recognize me, did not know who or what I was. To him, I was just another servant of chaos, perhaps more powerful than most, but nothing to fear, certainly not someone whose orders he needed to obey. I killed him where he stood, tearing his head from his shoulders with my bare hands. His blood sprayed across my armor, sizzling as it made contact with the warp-infused ceramite. His bodyguards moved to attack me, their chain axes revving, their bolt pistols firing. I ignored their attacks, the bolts detonating harmlessly against my armor, the chain axes skittering off my warp-hardened flesh. I walked past them as if they were not there, heading deeper into the settlement where the cult was based. The World Eaters pursued me, enraged by my dismissal of their threat, hungry for vengeance for their fallen lord. I permitted this. They would serve as a useful distraction, keeping any other forces occupied while I searched for the cult and its treasure. I found the cult holed up in an ancient temple, a structure that predated human settlement on this world. The architecture was strange, non-Euclidean, reminiscent of the structures one might find in the deeper reaches of the warp. This was no coincidence. The world had once been a daemon world, a place where reality and the warp overlapped. Something, perhaps the arrival of human colonists with their ordered minds and disbelief in the impossible, had pushed it back into normal space, but echoes of its former nature remained. The cultists were defending the temple against a squad of World Eaters who had found them before I did. They were losing badly. Despite their fanaticism and whatever minor warp gifts they might possess, they were no match for transhuman warriors enhanced further by the butcher's nails and the blessings of Khorne. I watched for a moment, assessing the situation. The cultists would be dead within minutes. The World Eaters would then claim or destroy the relic. This was unacceptable. I intervened, but not in the way one might expect. Rather than attacking the World Eaters directly, I reached into the warp and pulled. The veil between realities, already thin in this place due to its history, tore open. Through the breach poured Tsientian daemons, creatures of pure change and sorcery, anathema to the followers of Khorne. The battle immediately shifted. The World Eaters, faced with their hated enemies, forgot all about the cultists and turned to engage the daemons. The cultists, seeing an opportunity, retreated deeper into the temple. I followed them, moving unseen, cloaked in shadows and warp energy. They led me, unknowingly, to their inner sanctum, where their treasures were kept. Among these was the feather, encased in a crystal container inscribed with prayers and adorned with small metal ravens. As I reached for it, a voice spoke from behind me. "I would not do that, if I were you." I turned, surprised. Few beings could approach me undetected. Standing before me was a space marine in black armor, his face hidden behind a beaked helm. A raven guard, one of Korax's sons. But there was something strange about him, something not quite right. His armor was ancient, pre-heresy in design. His movements were too fluid, too perfect for an ordinary Astartes. And the power that radiated from him was immense, far beyond what any space marine should possess. "Korax," I said, recognizing him despite never having met him before. This was no ordinary Raven Guard. This was the Primarch himself, somehow still alive, still active in the galaxy after all these millennia. He inclined his head slightly. "Brother," he said, the word heavy with irony. Or should I say cousin? I am not certain what to call one such as you. "You know me?" I asked, genuinely surprised. I had assumed that all knowledge of my existence had been purged from Imperial records, that even the loyal Primarchs would not know of the lost 20th brother. "I know of you," Korax corrected. "I have seen echoes of you in the warp, reflections in the Immaterium. The Emperor spoke of you once, in a moment of rare candor. He called you his greatest regret, his most tragic failure." I laughed bitterly. How touching. He remembered me after all. "He never forgot you," Korax said. "None of us did. The two lost brothers, the two who could not be spoken of. We remembered, even when we could not speak your names." "Two?" I asked, momentarily confused. Then understanding dawned. "Ah, yes, the other empty plinth, The other missing statue. I am not the only lost son, am I? No, Korax confirmed. But your brother's fate was kinder than yours, I think. Death is preferable to what you have become. I gestured to the crystal container, the preserved feather within it. And what have you become, Corvus Corax? Not a corpse, not a daemon, yet not quite a Primarch either. Something in between, something other. I am vengeance, he said simply. I am retribution. I am the Emperor's justice, hunting those who turn their backs on their oaths, on their father, on humanity itself. Justice, I repeated, tasting the word. An interesting concept, coming from one who serves an empire built on oppression, superstition, and genocide. Tell me, brother, how many innocents has your Imperium sacrificed in the name of security? How many cultures has it exterminated in the name of unity? How many minds has it broken in the name of purity? Spare me your chaos rhetoric, Korax said, his voice hardening. I have heard it all before, from lips far more persuasive than yours. The Imperium is flawed, deeply and perhaps fatally. But it remains humanity's best hope for survival in a galaxy that wants nothing more than to see our species extinct or enslaved. And that justifies everything, does it? The ends sanctify the means? Sometimes, Korax admitted. Not always, not even often. But sometimes, yes, survival must take precedence over morality. That is the burden we bear, we who were created to defend humanity at all costs. I laughed again. Created, brother? We were not created. We were engineered, designed, manufactured. We are weapons, nothing more. Tools to be used and discarded when our purpose is fulfilled or when we malfunction. Is that what you tell yourself to justify your betrayal? Korax asked. That you were merely a tool, with no will or choice of your own? That the fault lies entirely with our Father, with fate, with circumstances beyond your control? I was lost in the warp, I snarled, my amusement vanishing in an instant. I was a child, alone and afraid, surrounded by horrors you cannot imagine. Where was he then? Where was his protection, his guidance, his love? Where were my brothers? Where were you? Fighting to unite humanity, Korax said quietly, fighting to create an empire strong enough to withstand the horrors of the galaxy. Fighting so that no more children would have to face the darkness alone. Cold comfort to those who fall through the cracks, I said. Cold comfort to those sacrificed on the altar of the greater good. Yes, Korax agreed, surprising me. Cold comfort indeed, but that does not change the necessity of the sacrifice. It does not make the alternative any more palatable. We stood in silence for a moment, two brothers who had never known each other, two sons of the same father who had walked radically different paths. In another reality, another timeline, we might have fought side by side. We might have been comrades, friends, confidants. We might have shared the burden of command, the weight of responsibility, the rare moments of peace between campaigns. Instead, we were enemies, divided by ideology, by experience, by the immeasurable gulf between loyalty and betrayal. You cannot have the feather, Korax said finally, breaking the silence. It does not belong to you. It is not yours to take. And if I insist? I asked, flexing my fingers, feeling the warp energy crackling beneath my skin, ready to be unleashed. Then we will fight, Korax said simply, and one of us will die, perhaps both. Is a trinket worth such a cost? I considered this. I was powerful, enhanced by millennia of warp exposure and the blessings of 4 chaos gods. But Korax was a Primarch untainted, his natural abilities perhaps augmented by whatever process had transformed him into his current state. The outcome of such a confrontation was far from certain. And for what? A feather, a symbol, a fragment of a brotherhood I had never known and would never know. Keep your relic, I said, stepping away from the crystal container. It means nothing to me. Korax nodded, accepting my withdrawal without comment. He did not gloat, did not press his advantage. He simply watched as I turned to leave. At the entrance to the inner sanctum, I paused. Tell me one thing, brother. Do you ever wonder what might have been? If things had been different? If fate had been kinder? Corax was silent for a long moment. Then, every day, every hour, every breath. But wondering changes nothing. The past is immutable. The choices we made, the paths we walked, cannot be undone. No, I agreed. They cannot. We are what we are, forever and always. I left without another word, leaving Corax to his relics, his memories, his endless hunt for traitors who would never be brought to true justice. I made my way back through the temple, past the battle still raging between the World Eaters and the Tsentian daemons, and returned to my ship in orbit. As I departed the system, I reflected on the encounter. I had failed to acquire the relic, but I had gained something perhaps more valuable, a conversation with one of my brothers, a glimpse of what might have been, a moment of connection, however adversarial, with one of the beings I had been designed to call kin. It was not enough. It could never be enough. But it was something. A small piece in the vast, incomplete puzzle of my existence. A minor note in the discordant symphony of my long, unnatural life. And in the eternity that stretched before me, in the endless cycles of war and corruption and rebirth that were my lot as a servant of chaos, such small moments were to be treasured, for they were the closest thing to humanity I would ever know again. The war continues. It always continues. That is the nature of this universe, this reality shaped by the thoughts and emotions of sentient beings. So long as there is life, there is conflict. So long as there is thought, there is division. So long as there is emotion, there are gods who feed upon it. I have fought in 1,000 campaigns across 10,000 years. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have witnessed the birth and death of stars. I have traveled the breadth of the galaxy and the depths of the warp. I have spoken with daemons and demigods, with aliens and abominations, with the last survivors of extinct species and the first pioneers of new ones. Through it all, I have remained what I am. Malchior, the forgotten son, the unremembered Primarch, the lost brother, the chaos champion, the being who might have been a hero had fate been kinder. My existence is a paradox. I am immortal, yet I die in some fashion with each transformation, each mutation, each new form the gods impose upon me. I am mighty beyond mortal comprehension, yet I am a slave to entities that view me as little more than an amusing pet. I am ancient, older than almost any living being in the galaxy, yet I am trapped in a perpetual present, unable to grow or change in any meaningful way. This is the curse of chaos. This is the gift of the ruinous powers. This is the bargain I made, the price I paid, the choice I embraced when I knelt before the four gods in that cathedral of corruption so long ago. Do I regret it? Sometimes. In quiet moments, in the rare periods of lucidity between bouts of warp madness, I wonder what might have been. I imagine myself standing on the walls of the Imperial Palace, defending Terra alongside Dawn and Sanguinius. I picture myself at the Emperor's side, one of his trusted generals, helping to shape the destiny of humanity. I envision a galaxy where the Great Crusade succeeded, where the Webway project was completed, where mankind ascended to its full potential without falling into superstition and decay. These are idle fancies, of course, meaningless speculation. The past cannot be changed. The choices once made cannot be unmade. The paths once taken cannot be retraced. I am what I am. I will be what I will be. Until the stars go dark and the galaxy falls silent, I will continue my eternal war against reality itself, against order and sanity and hope. Not because I believe in the goals of chaos, not because I share the gods' desire to unmake creation, but because it is all I have left. It is the only purpose remaining to me, the only role I can play in this cosmic drama. I am the cautionary tale, the warning. The example of what happens when potential is perverted, when greatness is corrupted, when power is turned to destructive ends. I am the shadow that gives definition to the light, the darkness that makes the stars visible, the monster that allows heroes to be recognized as such. This is my function in the grand scheme. This is my contribution to the narrative of existence. This is the meaning I have found in a life that should never have been, in an existence that defies all natural law and moral principle. It is not enough. It can never be enough. But it is something. A purpose, a reason, a justification, however thin, for the atrocities I have committed, the worlds I have burned, the souls I have damned, and in the eternity that stretches before me, in the endless cycles of war and corruption and rebirth that are my lot as a servant of chaos, such small comforts are to be treasured, for they are the closest thing to peace I will ever know again. I am Malchior, the unremembered Primarch. This is my tale, this is my confession, this is my legacy. Remember it well, for such knowledge is dangerous. Remember it well, for such tales are rarely told. Remember it well, for I am the ghost of possibility, the spectre of what might have been, the echo of a future that never was and never will be. And in remembering, perhaps you will understand the true horror of the universe in which you live, the true nature of the forces that shape your reality, the true cost of the endless war that rages across the stars. For in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And I, Malchior, the lost Primarch, the forgotten son, the champion of chaos undivided, am both its cause and its consequence, its perpetrator and its victim, its willing servant and its unwilling slave. This is the truth. This is my truth. This is all the truth that remains to me after 10,000 years of damnation. Weep for me if you will, hate me if you must, but remember me, for I am the unremembered Primarch, and to be forgotten is the only true death.